Yeah. Just making sure.
Like, okay. Okay, testing, testing. Okay. Okay, so good evening. Thank you, everyone who is in person and joining us online for tonight. We really appreciate your presence. Am I so good? So a little bit of, okay. So, yes, thank you so much for coming. My name is Candace Perry, and I am the Director of the Office of Environmental Justice at New Jersey's Department of Environmental Protection. And so if you haven't joined us at one of our meetings before, we really just welcome this opportunity to get to know you a bit better tonight. But many of you know the Office of Environmental Justice through our environmental justice community engagement sessions, which are no agenda style, town hall style meetings that we have been having within every community across the state to meet with overburdened communities and hear directly about their lived experiences, which is so, so important so that we can incorporate that feedback into the work that the agency does to create policies and programs and make our decisions to make sure that we have environmental justice in mind. Because the point is, overburdened communities exist all throughout our state. These are Black, Brown, Indigenous, low income, and communities that don't speak English maybe as their first language, who are experiencing more than their fair share of pollution and also a lack of environmental benefits. And what we mean by that is access to parks and open space and green stormwater infrastructure and tree canopies. So these communities are deserving of our protection, equal protection. They are deserving of an opportunity to meet with officials like us so that we can have a relationship and have some dialogue about that lived experience and use all of that to really make sure that we're doing our work better. And so we've been all across the state doing those meetings. But tonight is a little bit different because instead of having a no agenda meeting, tonight's meeting is very specific. The topic for tonight, we are here to talk about scrap metal sites that exist throughout the state. And we're here to do that because over the course of our environmental justice tour, we have heard questions and concerns and comments about scrap sites. And we thought, what better way than to do a community meeting where we can provide some testing, okay, where we can provide some good information in response to those concerns about how scrap metal sites might be impacting community health, because of some of the environmental hazards and pollution as far as dust and air contaminants and fires that we've heard about. And so we want you to know that we hear you. And as a direct response to those questions and comments and concerns, we are here tonight to kick off a discussion. And so I have some special guests here with me on the panel who are going to kick us off with some opening information just to make sure that we are grounded in understanding the lay of the land when it comes to regulating scrap metal sites. And then we'll open the floor up to all of you who are in person and online to engage in some good discussion. So we're excited about that. So let me introduce who you'll be hearing from. We have our leader of the DEP, Commissioner Sean LaTourette. We have Dana Lawson, who is the Bureau Chief within the Office of Recycling and Hazardous Waste. And we have Joe Trom, who is an enforcement coordinator within the Office of Legal, Regulatory, and Enforcement Policy. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I'll pass it over to the Commissioner.
Well, good evening, everyone. Am I coming through online? I'm plenty loud for the people in the room, but just want to make sure we're getting a signal through online as well. So give me a thumbs up if that's working. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. All right. I couldn't see it. Okay, thank you very much. So for those I haven't yet had the pleasure to meet, I'm Sean LaTourette. I have the great honor of serving our state as Commissioner of Environmental Protection. And your Department of Environmental Protection does a lot of different things. You know, many here in the room tonight know that. I know we have a number of guests joining us remotely online. But just a brief bit of overview or context I wanted to offer for this conversation this evening. Candace mentioned how we've traveled the state hearing from the people and communities that we serve about their lived experience of their environment, what types of conditions or circumstances they're confronting, and how we can help. And one of the things we've heard a lot about, both on our tour and through reports that come into our office or through our DEP hotline, have to do with the circumstances surrounding the operation of scrap metal facilities. And thankfully, we've got Dana here with us and Joe, who are going to get into some of the nitty-gritty details about how these types of facilities are regulated or not, and what the DEP can do with respect to circumstances surrounding scrap metal facilities and where our statutory and regulatory authorities are more limited, so that we can help our constituents, all of you, to understand what our existing regulatory environment is and how you can navigate that environment and make sure that we know the issues and circumstances that are affecting you and your communities. So first and foremost, I just want to ground us in the fact of how the Department of Environmental Protection oversees facilities of all kinds, including to some degree scrap metal facilities. It is not the case that the DEP broadly regulates any one type of facility, whether it's a scrap facility or a manufacturing facility, and all of its operations. Rather, what the DEP does is regulates sources of pollution that our environmental laws require be monitored and controlled. So we regulate the impacts to air quality from certain sources of air pollution. We regulate the impacts to water quality from certain sources of water pollution, and so on and so forth. And you hear me using the word certain, and that's not a mistake, because it is not the fact that DEP regulates every single type of water pollution from every single type of every type of industrial or commercial activity, nor is it the case that the DEP regulates every single type of air pollution. from every single type of commercial or industrial facility. And so tonight we're going to get into the weeds of what that means with respect to scrap metal facilities. And Dana will explain this a bit in more detail, that they're all different types of scrap metal facilities. You can see some of that on you can see that for yourselves through our online tool, the Environmental Justice Mapping Assessment and Protection Tool, or EJMAP. You can see slides this evening and on our website that show where certain scrap metal facilities are located, the ones that we know about, right? We don't know about all of them because not all of them are regulated by the DEP. And so you can see some of where those facilities are, and you can see to some degree the type of regulation that applies. Now, there are all different types. There are junkyards. There are facilities that store and transfer scrap. There are facilities that process scrap metal, and there are facilities that export scrap metal for sale. They're all different types of these facilities that you may see in and among your communities, and we're going to talk more about that. Now, we also see, and has been increasing occurrence lately, of fires at scrap metal facilities. And that has been an increasing occurrence over the last several years. And there are some reasons for that we'll talk through this evening as well. One reason, but certainly not the only, is the proliferation of lithium-ion batteries in more and more products, that when those products meet the end of their useful life and are brought to a scrap metal facility and ultimately processed by one, whether that's through crushing or through shredding or other types of processing of these materials, if those batteries are caught up in the material, they can lead to fire, because after all, lithium-ion batteries contain metals and chemicals and can indeed spark fire. There are multiple other issues that affect scrap metal facilities relative to noise and particulate matter. Those who live in and around these types of facilities are familiar with those types of occurrences. And to some degree, we have a regulatory requirement around some activities and not around others. And you're going to hear from Dana and from Joe on that. And we're going to also make note of some pending legislation that's been introduced in our state legislature that in order to address some of the gaps. Now, those are laws proposed by lawmakers and the DEP. We're part of the executive branch. Our job is to implement and enforce the laws that exist. We don't get to decide what the new ones are. That's a different branch of government entirely. But we've gotten questions from the constituents we serve about how this regulatory environment may change, if it changes. And so we're happy to discuss that with you this evening as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Dana to share some details about how these types of facilities are regulated under the laws that exist today.
Can you hear me? Oh, you can hear me now. Cool. Thanks, Commissioner. Thank you, Candace. And thank you, everybody, for being here in person and virtually. Again, my name is Dana Lawson, and I am Chief of the Bureau of Recycling and Hazardous Waste Management within the Division of Sustainable Waste Management. I have a few staff members here as well. I want to introduce them. We have our Director's Executive Assistant, Christina Page, who is technical expert who provides her technical expertise to the director's team. And then we also have some subject matter experts. Our supervisor in the recycling unit, Rakesh Patel. You just raise your hand, Rakesh. And a supervisor in our hazardous waste unit, Evan Alexazik. So today I'm going to be discussing how we in the Division of Sustainable Waste Management interact with scrap metal facilities. And I'm just going to build upon a couple of things that the commissioner just said. I will be ultimately focusing on New Jersey solid waste and recycling laws and regulations, but I do want to take a step back for a minute because I've worked in government for more than half of my life, but I understand that most of you, probably all of you, have not. So I wanted to just briefly describe the relationship between laws and rules. A bill is a proposed law. And these proposed laws or legislation are drafted by the legislative branch of government, and we know them federally as Congress. And then in New Jersey, our legislative branch is known as the legislature. So we, the people, vote for our New Jersey legislators. Our legislators draft these proposed laws. They go through a whole process. Once they land on the governor's desk, if the governor signs it, it becomes it's enacted. It's the law. A law is actually what establishes the broad legal framework. So it basically tells us what's required, what's authorized, and what's prohibited. They tell us what must be done and who can do it, but they don't actually often tell us how to do it. And that's where regulations come in. So regulations, also known as rules, can only be drafted when there is a law. The law gives us the legal basis to draft these regulations. And the rules, as the commissioner said, are created by the executive branch. And the department is the executive agency. And as the executive agency, we execute and we implement the laws. And so sometimes the laws give us the authority to implement them right away or implement some pieces of them right away. But we then go through an entire rulemaking process to draft rules, to clarify the law, and to describe how the law should be carried out in practice. So all of this is done, and we do this as a public stakeholdering process to ensure fairness and transparency and consistency, which we can get into later. But I wanted to provide that framework and have you keep that in mind as we look at how it applies specifically to scrapyards and why their classification matters. So you'll see on this screen a couple of definitions, and that's what I'm just going to start with. They are found in the recycling rules. They're based on the recycling law. And the first is a scrap processing facility. And that is a facility that can process, receive, process, store, or transfer source separated metals. And by processing, we mean things like cutting, baling, torching or welding, shredding, things like that for various purposes for including remanufacturing. And the commissioner went through a couple of the different types of scrap metal facilities like junkyards, other dealers who might actually purchase from a generator, sell to a processor. And there's more. There's small facilities, there's large facilities, they vary. The other definition that you see on your screen is scrap metals. And scrap metals can be anything from small shards or bits of and pieces of metal to larger items like scrapped vehicles or railroad cars. Next slide. Does somebody have control of that? Oh, it did? Oh, good. Okay, I didn't see that. Sorry. So back in the 80s, when recycling was passed into law, New Jersey's recycling law specifically and pointedly exempted or excluded scrap metal facilities from the definition of recycling center. So there's some facilities that handle the recyclables that you put at your curbside for curbside collection and that material like paper and cardboard, bottles and cans. But there's other facilities that we regulate that handle industrial stuff and demolition debris like concrete, asphalt, brick, block, that stuff. Also, other facilities that handle yard trimmings. And then other facilities that handle electronic waste or food waste. And for added emphasis, and you're going to hear me repeat this constantly through my couple of minutes here, we do not regulate scrap metal facilities. Scrap metal is not a regulated recyclable material. It's not a regulated facility. We will come back to this slide. There's another definition on here, and Joe will discuss that when he discusses stormwater controls at these scrap metal facilities. And we're ready for the next slide, please. So one of our goals in the Division of Sustainable Waste Management is to promote the reduction of waste. And we do this in part by promoting recycling. And as we promote recycling, we're also very cognizant and aware and doing everything we can to reduce recycling's impact on the communities and the environment. The department is supportive of recycling scrap metal. Recycling scrap metal reduces the need for new metals. It reduces the need for mining these materials. It saves energy. It diverts this material from disposal at landfills. But the thing is that scrap metal facilities, especially those with shredders, can have negative impacts on the environment and the community. Things like dust and odor, air toxins can be released. And then again, with the widespread proliferation of lithium-ion batteries that are virtually everywhere and everything all the time, strangely sometimes, they are a major fire risk as well. Next slide. So as I keep mentioning, we don't regulate scrap metal as a material or as a facility, but I do want to give you context and address how recycling is regulated in New Jersey, because while not enacted, and we don't know for sure which, if any, will be signed into law, there are several proposed bills circulating the legislature that in one way or another seek to either remove the exemption and incorporate scrap metal processing facilities into the recycling regulations, or they might impose additional types of requirements on these facilities that would very likely ultimately fall under my bureau's purview. So basically, the recycling rules are constructed for control, accountability, and protection. We have these in place to make sure that the facilities are properly run and protect public health and the environment. Generally, our recycling approvals or permits, we kind of use those terms interchangeably, but they specify the materials that the recycling facilities can receive, that they can handle, that they can process, and they also
Así, ellos también
specify the design
regulan
and the operational
específicamente
procedures for those
las
facilities.
operaciones. Nuestras reglas de reciclaje también se tienen que imponer en el departamento.
And issue violations if appropriate. And those violations can lead to monetary penalties. They can also, if they're egregious enough and they go through a whole process, could ultimately lead to shutting down of these facilities. So based on the current legislative proposals, my point is that it is possible that in the future, these facilities could potentially fall under the recycling regulations, but that is not where we are today. Next slide, please. So where are we today? We at the in my division, at the Division of Sustainable Waste Management, we don't have much authority over these scrap metal facilities, but we do have a little bit of authority over those facilities who shred the metals. And we have that authority through the Solid Waste Management Act under the Solid Waste Planning Regulations. If these shredding facilities are included in their county solid waste management plan, they do not have any reporting requirements to the DEP. They do, however, have to submit specific documents and other reports to us. And these documents are like a quality control plan so that we can ensure that there's protocols in place so that those facilities don't receive prohibited materials, or if they receive them, they can handle them properly. We receive sampling and analytical reports, which classify the residue that comes out of the shredding as a solid or a hazardous waste, so that's handled properly. And we also receive tonnage reports, which tell us what comes in and what goes out of the facility. So clearly, that information and the data in these documents are crucial for us for understanding the operations and the processes at these facilities. So basically, if a scrap shredding facility fails to submit any of these documents, we, of course, first offer some compliance assistance. If they completely fail to submit anything, we refer them to our compliance and enforcement colleagues who then take action. And that's it. That is literally the extent of our division's authority over these facilities. It's only about reporting. But just because we don't have any more legal authority over them, there's a lot of things that we can still do. And so next slide, please. So we being the universal we. So what you can do to assist in reducing the impacts of scrap metal facilities are things like anytime you see, hear, or smell anything that could be sourced to the facility, call the DEP hotline at 1-877-WARN-DEP. That's worth repeating. It's 1-877-WARN-DEP, or you can get the WARN DEP app, and I think there might be a QR code here for people to scan as well. Be sure to document what you see, and only if it's safe and if it's possible, take photos. Reach out to your county health agencies. They can give you data, they can answer your questions. And if they can't answer them, hopefully your local recycling or solid waste coordinator can answer them. So know who they are and reach out to them. And that's really critical for us and for you, because if you tell them, they'll tell us. These are the folks that we interact with really on a daily basis and sometimes multiple times a day. And also, as many of you have done, and I hope will continue to do, partner with local groups and organizations and get your voices heard. So while we wait for the fate of the proposed bills, there are, like I said, steps that each of us can take, and DEP in my division can certainly offer best management practices to these facilities, and we can recommend them, but we can't necessarily require them at this point. And I'm about to state the obvious, but I just want to emphasize that this is a super complex topic with technical and many legal layers. Scrap metal recycling benefits the environment and the economy if it is done right. And I'm not saying that all scrap metal operations are poorly run, but what I am saying is that scrap metal recycling must be conducted safely. And progress will depend on continuous feedback and accountability, and very specifically on continued engagement and partnership with all of you. So that's what I have to say. Thank you so much for listening, and I will now hand it over to Joe.
Hello. Once again, my name is Joe Trom. I am with the Legal, Regulatory, and Enforcement Policy Office at NJDEP. I'm going to focus primarily on some of the areas where we actually do regulate these facilities. As Dana just explained, we don't have a lot of authority under the solid waste or recycling regulations, but that doesn't mean that we don't regulate these facilities at all. If we can move forward to the scrap metal site map slide. So as the commissioner explained earlier, this is a slide from our online EJ mapping tool that shows the facilities in the state that we are at least aware of. So if we don't regulate them under the solid waste regulations, the question becomes, where do we get this data? We get the data from the permitting authority that we do have. So if you spend some time exploring this map and clicking on the different data points, it'll show you what types of permits each facility may or may not have. The ones that you're going to see most frequently for the scrap metal facilities data layer are either air permits or water permits. Specifically, the air permits, you're going to see something called a PCB code. That's a pre-construction permit. Those are permits that deal with specific types of equipment at these facilities. So even if we kind of say, we do regulate these facilities, that's not entirely the correct framing. The framing is we regulate specific individual processes at these facilities. So for example, when discussing scrap processing facilities, you heard reference to shredders, balers, furnaces, those types of discrete equipment that have combustion engines and can create emissions. Those are the individual pieces of machinery that require those pre-construction permits. And so those air permits specifically regulate the operations of that equipment, not the operations of the facility as a whole. And those permits can include conditions related to throughput on the machinery, certain reporting requirements, the information that our compliance and enforcement program needs to ensure that the permits are actually being complied with. But they don't get at the broader operational controls of the facility. Again, it's just limited to that specific piece of equipment. And also related to the air regulations, again, we've heard repeatedly from the communities that there are concerns about these fires that keep happening. And it's important to know that the bits of scrap metal that are actually combusting are not in and of themselves regulated sources under our air regulations. They're not one of those pieces of machinery that the permit applies to. The only regulatory authority we actually have over these fire incidents that keep occurring relates to reporting the fact that the fire is happening when there is a reason to believe that the smoke or pollution emitted from the fire will have off-site impacts that may result in either community complaints or impacts to nearby public health. But just the fire itself is not a regulated event from DEP. So that's really the crux of the air permitting side of things. We're really focused on the specific equipment that's being used at these facilities. The other type of permit you'll see if you scroll through this data layer are these water permits, specifically industrial stormwater permits. You'll see them referred to as NJIPDES permits because we love our acronyms, but I'm just going to refer to them as stormwater permits. Specifically, when you're dealing with industrial facilities that take recyclable material, where there is a potential source of pollution that can get into our waterways, meaning oils, metals, things that can run off through stormwater, they require a NJIPDES permit, a stormwater permit. And what that permit does is specifically manage the stormwater control on the site. Again, that's not related to the operations of the facility. It's just related to the stormwater controls themselves. So the permits will require certain best management practices to either contain, reduce, limit the amount of stormwater runoff from the site, limit or eliminate the exposures of these types of pollutants to that stormwater in the first place. For example, if you're looking at kind of your typical you pull it junkyard, there may be a requirement that the hoods of these vehicles are stored, or the vehicles are stored with their hoods down, so that stormwater is not getting into the engine compartment before running off on site. Or if there's a spot where a shredder processing facility is draining fluids out of these vehicles before processing them, that area may need to be contained in a certain way to prevent those fluids, those oils, from running off into our stormwater. And again, so that's really what the stormwater permitting is focused on. And if we can cycle back to the definition slide briefly, I can touch on that one definition that we kind of glanced over earlier. The next slide, yeah, this one. So not every industrial facility necessarily is going to require one of these stormwater permits. Specifically in communities that are served by combined sewer overflows, CSO communities, where wastewater and stormwater are going through the same pipes to a wastewater treatment facility. If all the facility's stormwater is going into that CSO system, there's essentially a presumption that the stormwater is going to be treated at the wastewater treatment plant. And so there's not the same level of exposure to our surface waters, and they may not require the same sort of stormwater permit that another facility that's not in a CSO community or where the stormwater is not going into the CSO system would need. So there can be a bit of a distinction there based on the exact scope of our regulatory authority. But again, the overarching kind of theme here is that both in the air and the stormwater context, these permits are related to the discrete sources of pollution that those programs are designed to take care of, and they don't really get at the overall operations of the site as a whole. And the last thing I want to touch on is when you hear us talking about permits in these types of facilities, if you dig into it a little bit more, you'll hear us referring to either general permits or individual permits. A lot of these permits are general permits. The air permits, the pre-construction permits, or minor source general permits. There can be some individual permits in the stormwater sense, but this is an important distinction because when you look at things like EJ MAP and you're considering how these facilities fit into the framework of the environmental justice law that's existing as an overlay over our regulatory authority, that requires not just that the facility be in an overburdened community to be captured by those regulations, but it also requires that the facility receive an individual permit. So if it's receiving just a general permit, which is a more broad kind of category of operations, then it's not captured by that law. But if it's an individual permit where the specific operations of the facility extend beyond what those general permits are designed to control, and you need more site-specific requirements, those are the types of authorizations that that law is designed to capture. So those are the types of things you want to think about when exploring EJ Map in terms of trying to fit the pieces together of how these function in the communities where they're sited. With that, I will turn it back to the commissioner to kick off the discussion.
So first of all, let me thank Dana and Joe and all the members of our team who have put this event together and tried to distill what is a really complex patchwork. I think it's fair to call it a patchwork of regulatory endeavors. What you all do every day is really, really important, and it helps to improve the quality of life in our communities. And I appreciate that so very much. But that work is far from complete. And we're here today to have this discussion with you all as an acknowledgement of that very fact, that the work isn't complete, and this patchwork that exists is a representation of that fact. So to sum up what we've heard, right? We've heard that scrap metal facilities are not regulated in the solid waste world, right? In Dana's world, the same way that landfills, garbage transfer stations, recycling facilities for our curbside recycling, scrap metal facilities are not regulated like any of those, which are governed by those other facilities, governed by operational permits or authorizations that govern to some degree the nature of the operations themselves. Scrap metal facilities are not subject to those laws. They are, in some instances, subject to stormwater regulations that exist to limit the amount of water pollution that may run off of their sites. In some communities, not in combined sewer overflow communities, where many scrap facilities are in fact located. There are air permitting requirements, as Joe explained, that pertain to certain scrap metal operations, primarily those that shred larger pieces of metal into smaller pieces of metal that will take a refrigerator or a car and turn it into pieces of metal that are the size of a quarter in some instances. And so that process does create particulate matter. And our air permits govern that to some degree. For example, at some scrap facilities, we require there to be a washing down of the materials that are being shredded to keep them from becoming friable into the air, right? To limit particulate matter. But that is not the case at all facilities, only those where there are large shredding equipment. And so this is the world in which we are operating. It doesn't mean that's the world in which we'll always operate. But given the amount of feedback we've heard from our communities, we want to be very clear with everyone about where there is opportunity for regulation and where that regulation applies, and the facilities are having creating adverse externalities in their community, that there may be an enforcement authority that should be executed upon. And it's so important to underscore what Dana said about that, which is regardless of where we have authority or not, it is so important to report the experience that you may have in your community, because you're not going to know whether or not there's something that we are empowered to do about it, but we will know. And where we have authority to act, we will act. And where we don't have authority to act, we will honestly convey that to you, right? And so making sure you know 1-877-WARN-DEP, and also that there's an app for that, right? Whether you've got an iPhone or an Android, you can go on to the App Store and you can download the WARN-DEP app. And you can report real time what you're experiencing and a picture. Upload it right there and then. And we do investigate those reports. So with that lay of the land, I want to turn it over to Candace to kind of open up the dialogue portion of this evening so that we can hear from all of you, those here and those online.
Okay, so now is your turn. So thanks to the commissioner, to Dana, and to Joe for outlining the patchwork, as the commissioner calls it, of our current regulatory options and some of those limitations. So we want to open the floor up to you at this time to kick us off into some discussion. So I invite you to form a line at the mic. You can come up and say your question or comment. And then for those of you online, we are monitoring the chat. So if you have something to say, drop it in the chat. You can also press the hand icon on your Zoom controls that will allow you to raise your hand, and so that you will be in queue to ask your question or say your comment. And then lastly, if you are calling in by a phone, you can dial *9. That will be the indicator for you to put your hand up and then again be in queue to ask your question or say your comment. So we'll take the first person in the room.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sharonda Allen of Operation Grow Inc., as well as the chapter co-chair for the Greater New Jersey Gateway Climate Reality Project. So I'm here for a variety of reasons. One of them is that I need to be able to share what this is all about. I'll probably be at the State House at the Energy and Environment Committee to push for legislation to regulate scrap metal facilities, which I'm sure contribute to pollution of particulate matter, which is inhaled and causes lots of respiratory issues, and I'm sure dermatological issues with the eyes, and, excuse me. And I wanted to know, what will be the bullets of the regulation? Do you have a model that you may go based off of? And also, when they're washing this down, can we ensure that they're using non-potable water? Because I know the DEP has a depot where you have water from. Maybe they could come get it from there, because to me, it's wasting water. I understand why they want to kind of, moisturize it a bit, as we can say, so that it doesn't, create the dust. But also, and I'm thinking, like, why wasn't it regulated? Was there somebody saying, don't touch us? Because, even historically, the fact that these facilities are located in Black and brown frontline communities is not a mistake. It was deliberate. So we need to look at these things. Who excluded scrap metal recycling? Because it's still recycling. What is your template? And can we ensure that they're with the legislation and then the rulemaking, can they please use non-potable water for wetting and moisturizing the metals? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Sharonda. So I'll try to answer what I can, right?
It was a lot, but
No,
it's me.
I appreciate it very much. And it's never too much, right? It's our job to be here with you all and to answer the questions that you have. And be honest where we don't have all the answers, and what potential legislation will do or will not do, whether it materializes in committee, on the floor, we don't know, right? That is the work of the legislative branch of government. But you can be assured that whatever the law, if one is passed, whatever it requires of us, we will be at the ready to implement, and we will do it as swiftly as possible. There's a couple of different pieces of legislation on this topic that have been introduced. Not all of them have moved through the legislative process at the same rate. There are different theories, I suppose, among the legislators on how this could be approached. One piece of legislation would remove effectively the exemption so that there is a treatment of these facilities akin to treatment as other recycling facilities. And DEP will ultimately have to figure out how to implement and rulemaking around whatever it is the legislature passes, if it does pass anything at all. And so we'll do that work. We know how to do that work, and you can count on us to do that work.
Yes.
Your point about potable water is a good one, a really good one. The facilities that are located in Newark, in Camden, and other waterfront places consistent with our port areas, they might have more ready access to non-potable water.
Yes.
So that's a thought that is worth pursuing, right? I'd encourage you to contact your legislator, right, and look into what is being considered, and you can talk to them just like you talk to us, and they should hear you just like we do.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Andrea or Andrea Murphy, you have your hand up, so feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Sure, good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Andrea Murphy. I am with the Environmental Commission for the Borough of Middlesex. We're in Middlesex County. I believe I might have some other members of the commission on the call that can speak up as well. I really appreciate this meeting. As you know, us on the Environmental Commission is a part-time passion for us. And we had spent a lot of time in our town in particular trying to do this research. And this was very well presented and answered a lot of questions that I was spending a lot of time to figure out. I'd like to go back to the terminology in the beginning that was presented. And I'd like to understand where a facility that smelts, that does specific aluminum smelting fits in. Because if I read the definition of a scrap metal facility, I see, from my understanding of smelting, that is turning it into something else. That is a processing. So is that a scrap metal? Is that recycling? Where does that fit in the state? And then the follow-up would be, what regulations would apply to a smelting facility?
Andrea, that's a really good question, and one that I appreciate. I was actually at a scrap smelting facility yesterday, or at least outside of one down in Camden, and so I'll try to do justice to your question, but we can also follow up with you if you want to share your contact information. So what we're talking about largely this evening has to do with the types of facilities that collect, that store, however, temporarily or long-term, metals that are at the end of their useful life, right? An old car, your old stove, your toaster oven, right? It goes somewhere, often to a scrap yard, a junk yard, right? And eventually, it may find its way to a facility that processes scrap metal in the ways that Dana explained. There are also facilities that, aside from cutting and shredding metal, use scrap metal to create something else. And I have a feeling that that's the kind of facility that you're speaking of, a facility that might take in smaller pieces of metal, maybe metal that's already been processed, and then utilizes a heat-driven process in order to reduce that metal to another state, right? A liquid state, or to fashion it in some way. In those types of facilities, it is likely the case that that activity, the smelting itself, is regulated under the Air Pollution Control Act, and requires, at a minimum, a pre-construction permit that Joe mentioned. And those types of permits are intended to govern the heating activity itself, because that activity of heating the metal creates air emissions. And it may also be the case that there's stormwater permitting that applies as well. But I'm hoping that my answer gives you a little bit to go on. But if you'd like to drop your name, contact information with the team here, we can certainly follow up with you if there's a facility in particular that you're interested in understanding more about. We can help point you to that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I will, because we do have this smelting facility. I've looked up the air and stormwater permits, and there have been no major violations. I have been there, and it is dirty. And they've had repeated releases to the stormwater, which flows actually into a lake in my neighborhood that had fish kills because of it. They are known to have a known contaminated site. And from a residential standpoint and representing my community, trying to keep it clean, it's very frustrating that there's been no action. They're known to pollute, and they keep operating. So we're looking for support to clean them up. I agree with the statement that was made earlier that, that this is metal going into a good use. It has resale value elsewhere. I am pro that. I just would like them to do it in my town that is not polluting the noise. We have a lot of residential complaints from the big banging of these smelted metals pallets. And, I smell it myself. You see the smoke when the incinerator's running, and they operate 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. And
you see visible smoke, visible black smoke?
You can. And you can see, we'd be very happy to meet you there. You can see on the side of the building, the black dust and debris is all over. It's on the ground. There's a sheen on the ground because they take transmissions, which are oil, and they're in essence burning those oil. They're not cleaning the transmissions before they go in the smelter.
Please do leave your information, Andrea, and we will absolutely follow up with you. Thank you for sharing this information with us tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate the support.
But this is a little shorter. I'll just take the mic. Christian Rodriguez here, pronouns they, them. Just a few questions. Are there any regulations on pile heights, state level, or is that mainly a municipality issue or concern?
It's a really great question, right? And one that we don't hear infrequently. I'll invite Dana to correct anything I may say wrong, and to chime in further, which you should just feel free to do at any moment, please, throughout the whole evening. So because these facilities are not regulated as solid waste or recycling facilities, which do have those types of restrictions, in this instance, the answer is generally no. However, where you have a shredding facility, there is an association between pile height and particulate matter. And so in some instances, our air permitting, or more usually our air enforcement division, would inspect for that because there's an association between the particulate matter and the volume of the material. But there's not a direct regulatory, what's the right word, hook on pile height individually. Dana?
Anything different? And I would just add that we do regulate pile heights in the recycling regulations, but we don't have that here. So we don't have oversight of that.
So where, for example, just to put a finer point on that, where there is a recycling facility that has plastic bottles or glass that are piled up, right? That regulation applies.
Right. Like, but I would have referred to like construction or demolition debris, like piles of brick and concrete and asphalt. There's only a certain, height that these piles can go to. There's also space between the piles so that fire equipment and other equipment can get through. And these are the operational controls that we don't have for these facilities now, as they're not regulated by us.
So it exists for other material, but it does not exist for scrap, is the answer.
No, I don't know. Are there local fire codes that have the pile height? There might be
That is a
local fire
great,
codes.
that is a great segue to the second part of your question, right, Christian? Because you mentioned, is it locally controlled? And there may be. There could be. The fire code is important to look at, but also another important point to look at would be where a facility that is sorting or exporting or shredding, whether it's located on property owned by a port, right? Whether that's, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, right? They have their own rules within the port. So we can only speak to the rules that we're responsible for, but it's a good thought to look at either the fire code or what a property owner like a port might require.
Thank you. My gears are turning now with respect to that question. So then we talked about earlier lithium batteries, and it's partially the reason why there's more fires happening. Is there now like a alert, right, to these facilities to say, hey, monitor your piles to make sure there isn't lithium batteries or anything to that effect?
Yes. An alert from the DEP, not an express alert. I think the alert is the fact that they keep catching on fire.
Yeah.
Right. And the facilities that experience those incidents, they are well aware of the underlying causes and contributors to the fires. I think one of the issues that you might hear facilities struggling with is the batteries that they may receive, they don't know they're receiving. I think there's good questions to be asked about that response, but I think that is a response that we hear often from facilities that handle scrap because of the fact that batteries are integrated into everything. I don't want to leave folks with a misimpression that somehow electric vehicles, right, cars with giant batteries, they're being shredded and that's starting a fire. That is absolutely not the case, right? I watched yesterday as a whole entire truckload of already crushed cars were brought to a scrap metal facility. And there is effort made earlier in the chain at the junkyard or at wherever it's being transferred, wherever it's coming from, to remove parts from the vehicle before it is even sent to the scrap facility. So part of the issue, because there's no regulatory oversight in any of these steps of this process. Whereas in the other waste streams there is, we don't exactly know. It's a matter of the relationship between the facility that's receiving the scrap to shred it up. They pay for it, right? They pay people to bring them these things, right? Because it's valuable. But what is required of the sender, I wouldn't be able to tell you. And so part of what the scrap shredder would say is, well, we tell them to send it to us with nothing, right? And so we don't want these fires to be happening, and I'm sure they don't, right? But there's a question about diligence, I think.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, some of the shredders, like I mentioned, are required to submit quality control plans, and they have a list of prohibited items. And on those prohibited items is lithium ion batteries. But again, like I was saying, they are in everything, everywhere, all the time. We don't even know some of the stuff that has these batteries in them. So it's hard, for these facilities to detect the batteries that are coming in. And then with regards to EV batteries, the electric vehicle batteries, there was a law that is enacted for it's called an extended producer responsibility law. And so the manufacturers are responsible to take back these electric vehicle batteries. We have just contracted, so the law was passed, that will be overseen by our division. And starting, I think in January, we're going to do a needs assessment so that we can find out where the gaps are, figure out what's needed. And then ultimately we will have a program where these batteries will be taken back by the manufacturers. So kind of remove those from the waste stream.
It's really good. Thank you for that. And two more questions and then I'll finish. What happens if a pile falls in the water, such as a river? Because in Bayonne, there's a scrap metal facility. They're right on the water. And I think you all had a caller from in a Camden. And so I'm like trying to help that community with the situation. And so I know the question, they had videos, and it was just appalling to me to see some of that, the piles and even the dust falling into the river. And so is there, on that end, is there any regulations?
Were there operating permits and operating conditions, there would be a degree of oversight on that type of activity to better ensure those things don't happen. Certainly you can't throw what is effectively garbage metal into the river. But then on the other hand, it's not technically under the rules solid waste, right? It's something else entirely, right? It's scrap metal, which is accepted. So the lack of a mature legislative and regulatory environment existing around this issue as a whole makes it hard for me to say whether or not that is in fact regulated.
Yeah.
Now, it shouldn't happen.
Right.
Right? It should absolutely not happen. The stormwater permit isn't exactly what she's asking about. She's asking about what is in, you may experience this statement as a generous one, an accident, right? Like they don't mean to put it in the water. They want to lift it and put it on a barge because when it goes in the water, they're losing money, right? Because they're selling this stuff ultimately, right? Those that are shredding it into small pieces and barging it, usually to other countries, they're making money off of this, and they're keeping the overall sort of ecosystem more circular, meaning the ecosystem of the metal itself, by avoiding mining more metal. Reusing metal is a really good thing, right? But what we're dealing with is the externalities of that really good thing not being well managed, or in some cases managed at all.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And would y'all consider coming to Bayonne? I think it's really important. That community really is looking for information like this to be shared so they have a better understanding? Because I know
I
they're.
have been to that very site myself.
Oh, you have? Okay,
I have.
great.
It's been a couple of years, right, Candace?
Okay,
Happy
okay.
to go back.
Please do. All right, thanks. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, I believe we were last there in 2023, so it's been time to go back.
Sounds like it's time.
Yeah. Okay. I want to pose a question from Allison Perry, who put this in the chat to you, Dana, because you just mentioned in the quality control report that there's a prohibited list of items and that batteries is one of them, right? So Allison says, like, what are the repercussions for a facility if there is a battery that's on that prohibited list, but it still ends up in the pile?
So when I say prohibited list, I just want to be very clear that is the facility's list of prohibited items they do not want to accept. And so I don't have an answer for what the repercussions are, but we've all seen what has happened. The facilities have caught fire. But they do have, when the facility does accept accidentally the prohibited items, they also have in their quality control plans protocols for ensuring that when they catch those materials that are coming in, they have protocols to ensure that they are handled properly. So
I want to just put a finer point on what Dana explained here to make sure Allison hears it correctly. What Dana's referring to is a system of self-governance, right? Self-governance by the scrap facility. In this instance, you're referencing the processing facilities, right? And so the processing facility is saying to all those from whom it purchases metal, don't send us XYZ, right? There is no repercussion from the state government if they do accidentally or otherwise receive that material, because that's just a matter between them and the private party from whom they likely purchased that material. The department doesn't have any authority for there to even be a repercussion.
Gotcha.
The only authority is for the report itself.
Right. So I hope that answers your question, Allison. Feel free to come off mute if there's something further we can clarify for you. And while you're maybe thinking about that, we'll take the next person in the room. Go ahead.
I just want to ask, do scrap metal facilities, I came a little late, do scrap metal facilities have to, James Dombrowski from North Arlington. Do scrap metal facilities have to monitor below, as like gas stations have to monitor the groundwater, either at the facility, or has the state done any work on the adjoining areas that aren't necessarily on their property, but surround the property, and is there a date on that? So are they polluting the ground also?
No, there's no requirement for them to monitor for that.
So is that part of what the state's trying to do, coming up with regulations to monitor what's going into the ground?
No, what we were referring to about, the regulatory environment may be changing, that would only happen if the legislature passed a law and said, DEP, you should now do X, Y, Z, right? We only perform the functions that the legislature directs us to perform. That's the way the executive branch and administrative agencies function.
More regulation than a scrap metal facility, because they have to monitor the below the ground to see if the gas tanks are leaking.
Unquestionably, a gas station is far more heavily regulated than a scrap metal facility. Yes.
I mean, it sounds like a worthwhile concern, though. Like, it could be something that you talk to your legislator about incorporating into proposed pieces of legislation, if that's a concern of yours.
One thought that just jumped in my mind in response to that question, it's a good question. Dana was mentioning that there's a requirement for those that process to report the material that the characteristic of the material that is coming out of the shredding, right? Because it's not just the metal that's coming out of the shredding. There's other stuff attached to the metal, pieces of plastic largely, right? Paint, rubber, etc. And so that's separated out, and there is characterization, right? You want to explain what that means?
Might ask Evan to chime in. We require that the auto shred residue that comes out of the shredders is classified. So when I say classified, we conduct waste classifications, and Evan is actually the supervisor of the unit that oversees that. And the facilities, what do? They send us information on the toxic leachability of it. All right, I'll hand it to you so you can discuss.
Yeah, usually we look at like T-clip metals. That is usually the results that they send us for monitoring.
Explain.
T-clip is like heavy metals, like yeah, exactly.
Right. And so when they give us those results, we review them to ensure that we classify them. And as I said earlier, they'll either be classified as a solid waste or a hazardous waste and then handled appropriately. And so far in the reports that we've seen over the past few years that we've been receiving these analyses, we have not received any that have tested hazardous waste. And then I would just add to this conversation, should these facilities be regulated as recycling facilities? One of our requirements for many of our facilities is an impervious surface, so that these activities are conducted in ways that wouldn't cause the stuff to leach into the ground.
Yeah, good point.
That also does create more water runoff, right? So, and I'm not saying that your answer is a bad one. I think what I'm trying to kind of tease out is that all these things are interrelated to each other, right? It's good to have impervious cover so that your waste material from the shredding, right, that can contain heavy metals and plastics and really fine grain, which could become water pollution or land pollution, right? It's better for that to be on an impervious cover. But then you also have to have stormwater controls so that that fine material, when the rain hits it, or the water from the cannons that keep the particulate from going into the air, doesn't just wash that into a community or a waterway, right? But we're not there yet on these facilities. They're not organized with all of these things in mind, and they're certainly not operated with all of these things in mind. I'm pretty confident of that.
Okay, so staying along the lines of stormwater, we talked earlier about combined sewer overflows. And so we have a question from Paul Friend, who's wondering what can be done about getting rid of combined sewer overflows, recognizing that Joe talked about earlier, there's an exemption for scrap metal sites that are located within CSO areas. So, in light of that exemption, what can be done to prevent combined sewer overflows?
So for anyone who doesn't know what that references to, the term combined sewer overflow, or CSO, it refers to a type of infrastructure, right? There are some communities, more modern communities, more built more recently, have two types of wastewater infrastructure. There is sanitary wastewater infrastructure, right, for the water that we flush, and then there's stormwater infrastructure for the water that falls. In a community that has a combined sewer overflow system, that is a single system where the water that we flush and the water that falls travel through the same conveyances and ultimately reach a treatment plant so that the wastewater is cleaned before it is then discharged, right? They take the bad stuff out before it's discharged into ultimately the Newark Bay or the Atlantic Ocean or some other waterway. But in one of those combined systems, the pipes are too small for when it rains a lot. And so when that happens, there's an escape hatch all throughout the system, several escape hatches. Those are called overflows. And it means what the word says. When it rains really hard, that combined wastewater and stormwater is just released into the waterway without going to the treatment plant. And so that does create higher degrees of pollution. And a lot of communities no longer have these or have been required by the federal government to separate them into two separate systems or to have different types of technology that stop that overflow from happening. New Jersey has one of the worst problems nationally with combined sewer overflows, and particularly in our urban core. So communities like Newark and Bayonne and Camden all have combined sewer overflow systems. We are at a point now, finally, in New Jersey, where those are in the process of being replaced or upgraded finally, right? But it's going to take 20 plus years, right? And a lot of money. So there's a good question to be asked about how all of that fits together with this particular issue of runoff from facilities that have sometimes heavy metals.
Okay, so going back to the point about smelting earlier, Claire Lavorne says, how will the new regulations, if approved, change smelting business processes?
Even if the legislature were to enact a law about scrap metal facilities and then DEP have to regulate them, it doesn't change the laws that apply to smelting, right? Smelting is a well-regulated process, a well-regulated type of facility. There's, I think, a question to be asked based on that one of the prior callers about whether whether facilities are being compliant. There's a difference between something being well-regulated and then those who are acting within that system being compliant with its terms. But smelting facilities, are subject to the Air Pollution Control Act. Depending on the nature of their substances, they probably have other requirements for discharge prevention and pollution prevention would potentially apply at those types of facilities. It's all about volumes of material that are utilized or stored in those processes.
Okay, great. Claire, feel free to come off mute if there's something further we can clarify for you on that point. In the meantime, I'm going to go to Angela DeQuina. You have your hand raised, so please feel free to go ahead.
Sorry about that. I was unmuting. I want to revisit the site in Bayonne because I'm with the Hudson Regional Health Commission. We're the CHA agency for Hudson County. And we have concerns about how that site even came to be there because it did not seem proper in our eyes. That site opened in April of 2023. Coincidentally, the same day the environmental justice rules became effective. That was after there was a large fire at their Newark facility and they moved to Bayonne. The site is operated by EMR on the Duraport property. And as you are well aware, EMR is a sophisticated actor. They know all the rules, and yet they did not comply with any environmental justice regulations. They did not get the air permit that they needed for the site. DEP did go out there about 6 months after they opened in October of 2023, observed that there was no air permit. Unfortunately, a violation wasn't issued by DEP until a year later after there was another fire at that site, and our office responded to multiple complaints. In September and October, we did some sampling. Our health officer issued a letter to Director Perry as well as Director Wormley for air compliance and enforcement, a 5-page letter detailing our concerns. Nothing really happened after that letter. Sadly, we didn't even get a response. In April, we reached out to Director Wormley again to, find out the status of what was going on, because when the violation notice did go out in October of 2023, the facility was given 30 days to get the permit. The application was not subsequently submitted until May, and then approved in September of this year. We were notified that the application was approved, and we raised the question of, well, wait, what happened to all the environmental justice requirements? Where was the impact statement? Where was the public hearing? We were advised at that time that the area surrounding this facility was no longer an environmental justice area. And come to find out, just, in looking at your map on the mapping tool, the area just around that was carved out in January. So, with all of this extended timeframes for compliance, and the fact that the facility opened its doors without complying with any regulations, we were a little dumbfounded that a permit was ever even issued. Just to such an egregious, non-compliant facility. So that's my first point. And so we're still.
Would you like me to respond to that before you go to your next, so I keep it in my mind?
Well, it's just part of.
Oh, okay.
The second part is part of that is we would like to know how, if you look at the mapping tool, the greater part of Bayonne is still covered as an environmental justice area. So we're wondering what prompted the carve out of that specific area, because we're not familiar with any significant demographic shifts in the last year in that area of Bayonne, and that area is being impacted. In fact, we had another fire just last week.
Yeah.
So that's the first part of my question. And then regarding pile height, if you just remind me about that when you're done, I just wanted to ask a question about that as well.
Angela, first of all, thank you for joining us this evening and for sharing that, and mentioning. I think you mentioned that you're with the county and you're a partner on the County Environmental Health Act. Did I hear that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
I appreciate that very much. That's really important work that you do, and I want to underscore that because it is really, really important. I hear your frustration. It frustrates me as well. And there is no question that what you are experiencing in that litany of events is the absence of concrete regulatory authority. That is what you are experiencing. And the question about the location to Bayonne, relocation to Bayonne in 2023, quite literally, Candace and I were there within a few months, like within a few weeks to a month or two right after that relocation. And it was a surprise to us as well. But it's not as though they needed to seek any approval from the DEP to be there at all, period, full stop. And that is, part of what I imagine the legislature is taking note of. So if nothing else, it is your frustration must be reaching those who get elected to the legislature, because there are now pending pieces of legislation with respect to the question about violation and then permitting, and why the EJ law was not complied with. Why was there no hearing? Why was there no environmental justice impact statement? Because it's not required. It's a scrap metal facility. That's a covered type of facility under the EJ law. but only when an individual permit is required. There is no individual permit required. There is only a pre-construction permit required. And in that instance, there is no environmental justice applicability. The question that the other point that you're making about change designations in EJMAP, I am certain that Myla Ramirez, who's in the back of this room, could answer that question for you, and we can follow up with you and get the answer, because the data does change and EJMAP is updated annually, if not more, and as a reflection of updates in the underlying demographic data or the regulatory data that feed into it. And so we do see block groups be EJ subject one year and then not the next, right? So we can get you that answer. But even if it were a block group within EJMAP identified as an overburdened community, it still wouldn't apply unless there's an individual permit. And there wouldn't need to be an individual permit for stormwater either, because it's a CSO community, right? And there's an exemption for that. And so what you're seeing in my response is that this patchwork is at play. And in the time that the time delay that you're mentioning with you reached out to this person or another at DEP, make no mistake that they want to do the best they can for you. But internally too, they're navigating that patchwork and the limitations legally upon what they can or can't do. Ultimately, they did get a permit, and that means there are some requirements at play. But from the tone of what you are saying, I think I'm hearing in your voice that it's not good enough. And I want you to know that I hear you. And that reaching out to your legislator right now is, that is something that's available to you. And I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer. I wish I had a better one.
Well, thank you for your response. And I just wanted to touch back on the pile heights, because I'm just wondering if, there is a requirement in the permit now that they have to, not cause, suffer, or allow off-site impacts, such as odor, et cetera, et cetera. But given that they have a pattern now of fires, and we know that these fires they're not going to be fewer in number, they're going to be more in number as time goes on. If you could just be more aggressive and say, well, if you have a demonstrated history of having fires, so you have to take actions in order to comply with that permit condition, which is a permit condition, that you have to minimize the size of the piles. Because like in this last fire that we just had, weekend before last, we had New York fire boats coming over to spray, and people in the community are impacted, and there's public housing just adjacent to the site there. So I just wonder if being a little more aggressive in what you're saying is how they have to manage these impacts. It's a performance standard. It's not a specific prescription of what the height is, but that you have to manage the height so as to not have these impacts. When a fire occurs, it can be put out more expeditiously, that we don't have to call New York Fire to come over.
Angela, are you saying that you read that in the permit, or you're suggesting it be in the permit?
I read it in your reference point number 2 on the permit. It says permittee shall not suffer, allow, or permit any air contaminant detectable by the sense of smell to be present in the outdoor atmosphere. So when there's a fire, there's a sense of smell of that fire. There is particulates. So try to be more encompassing rather than more limiting.
Yeah, I so hear that. I really do. The reluctance that you're hearing in my voice is because of the nature of that permit. The permit is not about the fire. The permit is about the activity they're conducting. The fire is an accident. Now, what you're observing, and I think we all are observing, is that the fires at these facilities have become less like the exception or the fluke and more of a feature or a condition.
Exactly.
And so that is a really good observation and an important one, but it's still not constrained under that permit, right? The permit is about the freeable particulate into the air during their operation, not about what happens because of an accident. But I think what we're all struggling with is the question of, are these even accidents anymore? Or are they features of the types of operation? And what do we need to do about that if in fact they are now features of the operation? And I think you see the legislature trying to answer for that question and what they're doing. I really take to heart what you've said, though, and I'm going to go back and read that condition. I'm going to go back and I'm going to read the Air Pollution Control Act and our regulations, and I'm going to think even harder about it because I want to do more for you and for your community.
Thank you.
Just to add what Angela said, you mentioned that they only needed a general permit for pre-construction. What about the equipment? Because you said you need permits for the equipment. I don't know the whole how they operate, but just wondering if they needed one for their equipment itself.
Those are largely pre-construction.
Still pre-construction. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
When where the equipment reaches a certain size and therefore emission output, then perhaps you then need then you may need an individual, but those are pre-construction permits. So think of it as the difference between a minor source. I know you know what I'm talking about, right? A minor source permit and a major source permit. These are in the category of minor, and the EJ law really pertains to major, right?
Yeah. Okay, I want to go to a comment or a question that we have in the chat from Douglas Freeman. And so he's saying that our organization, the Weequahic Park Sports Authority, has raised repeated concerns about the scrap yards located next to the Weequahic Park. One of these sites recently caught fire and caused pollution in the surrounding area. Why does it seem that the follow-up from our previous meetings and discussions on this issue has been forgotten or dismissed? What accountability or monitoring measures are currently in place to ensure that environmental and public safety concerns like this are properly addressed? And so let me start off because I think, Douglas, we've met before at similar meetings like this. If I can fill in what I believe is what you're saying, I believe you're referring to Dublin Metals as the site. And so I do want to let you know I have some information from my team here that there are two Aona Kappas, and I'm going to tag in Joe here to help define and explain what that means. But we have taken two recent enforcement actions against this facility because of violations for illegal dumping at that site. And so I'm not able to tell you the status of that today. I think those two actions were taken back in 2021 and 2022. So here in 2025, we owe you an update. So we can get that for you. But in the meantime, I'm wondering if Joe can let us know, like, if in such a scenario like this, what define for us what an enforcement action looks like in terms of an Aona Kappa, and once one is issued to a facility, what happens after that?
Sure. So as I said earlier, we love our acronyms. It's an unfortunate feature of state government. Aona Kappa is Administrative Order and Notice of Civil Administrative Penalty Assessment. Essentially, it's once we've identified that a violation exists at a particular facility of either a permit condition or our regulations, that puts the responsible entity on notice that this violation exists, and there's that assessment of a civil penalty. These Aona Kappas, these orders, also direct them to take certain corrective action to resolve the violation and come back into compliance within a defined time frame. Those compliance objectives can be things like apply for a permit if you don't have one, or if you have a permit and you've not been complying with it, take certain actions to comply with the conditions of that permit. The one thing to really keep in mind when it comes to these administrative orders with any administrative legal process is once we order someone to do something, they also have a right to contest that order. They have a right to submit a request for an adjudicatory hearing. And that can lead to essentially a court-like proceeding to adjudicate, to judge whether we appropriately determined the violation or assess the penalty. So the Aona Kappa is our mechanism to compel compliance, and there's a defined time frame, but it can sometimes take longer than that just by nature of the due process that people have when we do this. But if there is continued non-compliance even after we've issued an administrative order, we have the option of issuing additional administrative orders if there are additional violations. And most of our statutes also include other types of enforcement mechanisms we can use if there's a really egregious violation or continued violation to seek other relief. But the Aona Kappa is kind of our standard go-to enforcement mechanism when there's a violation that warrants a penalty assessment and an order of corrective action.
I'm going to put that in non-lawyer speak. It's a fine and a directive to do what we say, but they get a right to appeal. And those appeals can take a long time. And in the course of the time of their appeal, we are not able to get from them what they're supposed to be doing during that time. So, the system as it exists, you are able to contest what the government tells you you should do, and you should be able to contest what the government tells you. But it does sometimes have the effect of delaying compliance. But one point that I want to hit on here for the caller, what his name?
Douglas.
Yeah, for Douglas. What you heard Candace say was that it was a fine and an order about illegal dumping. So we found a violation of the Solid Waste Management Act, right? It's not about the scrap metal.
Yeah.
Because there's no authority for us to do that.
Same offer goes to you, Douglas. If you want to follow up, feel free to come off mute. In the meantime, we'll go to you in the room.
Hi. That on. I'm still not used to talking through microphones.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Michelle Lange with New York, New Jersey Baykeeper, Hackensack Riverkeeper. Just to hopscotch over to, let's say the legislation passes. How quickly on the tails of that will we see DEP get to work on implementing regulations, and will there be a meaningful stakeholder process so that the folks in the room here and other frontline community members and representatives can really engage in what they see best and what ideas and thoughts they might be able to sort of add to what you've already kind of put together?
It has been our commitment in this administration, right, that we engage in that deep community outreach and inclusion in our processes. And for as long as I am the commissioner of this agency, you can count on it.
Okay, so I believe Mary Jane Desmond, you're next. Your question is, in Bayonne, our scrap metal facility is approximately 400 feet from a low-income public housing complex and a public park. Aren't there laws against locating such facilities in this area? Mary Jane.
No, at least not laws that the state DEP has control over. There may in fact be laws at the local level, zoning laws and municipal ordinances about the proximity between that type of operation and your home. There may be requirements, even if it can be your neighbor, how far its operation needs to be set back from its property boundary, from your property boundary, or from any other residential development. But those would be local laws, but they don't exist at the state level.
You know, Mary Jane, this would be a really good point of advocacy if I can recommend this to you, to go to Bayonne and encourage them to consider an environmental justice ordinance. So a local law that could look at mapping like how we have in our EJ mapping tool to identify sensitive populations, overburdened communities, things like daycares and public housing complex that you point out, and, you know, put some buffer zones around those sensitive areas, looking and taking into consideration the existing levels of pollution that are in those areas. EJ Map can tell you all of that. Would be a really cool thing if a town could enact an environmental justice ordinance considering those cumulative impacts in the neighborhood, and then decide in a policy fashion what should go and shouldn't go where. So unfortunately, by the time something comes to the DEP, we're one of just the last sets of approvals that is needed for a facility. That local advocacy is so important.
And I just add that the city of Newark does have an ordinance that's sort of like what Candace just mentioned there. And so, you know, that's, you know, on the books in Newark if you wanted to take a look. I'm not aware of another municipality in New Jersey that has an ordinance like that, but there may be some.
Yeah, not in New Jersey, but the city of Chicago has an environmental justice ordinance. I've heard that just in the rumblings, to be a model that has been lifted up nationally. So I would check out the city of Chicago. We'll take the next person in the room.
Sorry, I got eager and came up before you you told me to. So I'm Alejandra Torres with Ironbound Community Corporation, and my question or request really follows Michelle's question of, okay, now let's say we're in the world of there is a piece of legislation and now you're tasked with rulemaking and regulations. You know, we see that regulation often isn't enough. And under the world of solid waste management, for example, we have the incinerator here in Newark, and there's so many violations, and then they get slapped with a fine, and that's the extent of it. And so I'm wondering here in the scrap metal sites realm, to the extent it's possible to, I don't know, enforce better, or in the rulemaking process, like the fines not going to like a general treasury fund, but going to the local community that gets impacted. I don't know, just putting it out there. And also like that the language around violations like be stronger, and not just like you're found to have a violation and therefore you can't operate for like a year, and then you reapply and, you know, start the process again. So I would love to hear your thoughts on just like how better to strengthen the, like, you know, the fines and like the violation process and the rulemaking path for scrap metal facilities when we get to that point, hopefully.
It's a really good thought if we get to that point.
Right.
Right. And, you know, please do not, I hope folks here, with the way that I'm trying to explain things today, are not mistaking me for trying to put off this issue on another branch of government. It's not my intent, but the relationship between the legislative branch and the executive branch on these issues is really important, right? Because what you may experience as a limitation on enforcement or a limitation on penalties, or where penalty money should go. I heard that in your statement as well. Those are all really important things, but they're not things we get to decide. They're decided in the legislation. We only decide how we implement them if the legislation doesn't already say how, right? And so there's a balance there, right? So the points that you're making, they're really, really good points. And, you know, there are legislators here in your community, right? Senator Ruiz, Assemblywoman Pinto Marin, these issues I know to be important to them, right? And unquestionably, they'll be involved in legislation that's before the legislature, right? So these are really good reflections to bring to them, where our penalties, the way that those are implemented, the legislation always tells us about how to do that. Some laws have higher penalties, some laws have lower penalties. What is determined by the regulation is, you know, when they are assessed, sometimes how they're calculated, right? Is it daily, right? Does it compound? Sometimes we get to make those determinations, but so much of it is decided in the law itself.
Right. Okay. I figured, but still wanted to put it on the record. Thank you.
I think it's important to be on the record.
Yeah.
You know, I'm James Dombrowski again, being on what you just brought up. Are there examples of environmental friendly scrap metal operations in America? Can you give one? Well, listen, I had to ask that question. You knew it was coming.
I actually didn't know that particular question was coming. So environmentally friendly scrap metal operations. Dana and I have both said this in different ways. Scrap metal collection, processing, and reuse is environmentally friendly by its very nature. However, every single thing we do every day, right now, how you got here, how you used your water today, what you threw in the garbage or in the recycling, right? Everything we do has an environmental externality, right? And the question is how well we deal with that externality and if we deal with it at all. So what you're seeing here, right, what we're living in many of our communities is the externalities of what at its core is a good thing, right? Reusing metal so that we're not mining it, that we're building a more circular economy. Those are really, really good things. But even good things aren't free of negative environmental externalities, right? And so what would the best one in America be? I don't know. I know that the state of California regulates it better than we do in the state of New Jersey, but they have laws that we don't have here, right? And so the question is, what do we want it to be? Not what is it? What do we want it to be? And all people who vote have a power to determine that when it's before the legislature.
And do it inside.
So I think one of the things you'd find is in the recycling world, that is in fact how it's done in many respects. Dana, do you want to speak to that a bit?
So there are certain recyclable materials that that we regulate where we require these operations to occur indoors with really extensive air management systems. So it maybe should be required indoors.
And that's, that's a management choice. That's a policy discussion, right? And that is a discussion that it appears the legislature is having to some degree, right? And your voice is in that matter, right? And then ultimately how that is implemented as a matter of making regulations, if that happens, your voice in that matters as well. At some scrap facilities, portions of it are, I wouldn't call it indoors, but covered, right? Right? So that it is better contained. And principles of secondary containment have wildly improved our environment and our management of environmental externalities, right? Even when it comes to how we hold liquid materials that could be dangerous if released in the environment, right? You go up and down the turnpike, you see big containers, right, of oftentimes probably some type of an oil or a chemical. It's not only in that container that you can see rising in the distance, but down on the ground, there's something built around it too, just in case, right? And none of those types of principles apply in this scrap metal setting. They were left out, right? That's what we're pointing out for you here. And the question of how we do that better is a question that we all get to participate in answering.
Is it Jim, right? Yeah, Jim. So we have a contribution actually from Maggie Broughton in the chat, and they're saying that EMR has a facility in Becker, Minnesota, that has a fully enclosed, that the facility is fully enclosed, and it runs entirely on renewable energy. And they've put the link to this in the chat, so we can make sure we email it to you, so you get that.
And I will call my friend Katrina Kessler, the Secretary of Environment in Minnesota, tomorrow and ask her about it.
Thanks for that, Maggie. Okay, so do we have any other? Yeah, go for it.
Good evening. Dr. Leah Owens. I'm coming from the Southward Environmental Alliance. And so with all of this conversation about the constraints of regulations and how legislation has to be passed in order to create certain regulations, I heard you, Commissioner, mention earlier that there were some bills on the books that are addressing some of these issues that we're discussing. And I don't know if it was intentional not to name the numbers or not, or if you could speak to what is out there right now so we can do a little research and follow up on those bills. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, for sure. One, I'm sure that I have it somewhere. I was not I was not ready for that question, but they're all on the legislature website. I can pull that out if you just give me a second.
I think A5852 might be the one that is proposing that they be recycling centers. They're all assembly bill numbers, so.
Yes.
50,
In the assembly, that's right. Say that number again.
That's assembly A5852.
And its prime sponsor is Assemblyman Bill Moen from the delegation in Camden, Gloucester City area.
All right, we'll be able to send out the link to that to anyone who's interested. So let me go over to I want to get to your question. Paul Friend, you're saying, can municipalities create their own restrictive permits? We talked about options for municipalities to take. So maybe a first threshold question is, do municipalities have permits that they authorize?
So municipalities have a lot of control over what happens within their borders in the state of New Jersey in particular, right? We have a lot of municipalities, more than the state of California. And they all have their own ordinances, their own version of regulation, if you will. And so I think on this particular topic, it's a great one to raise to your local government, right? Well, not any, but many types of facilities, when they're proposed to be located somewhere, require approval from the zoning board, right? And so there is definitely a local element to this. And where the state doesn't have authorities or laws that govern a certain issue, the municipality is especially empowered.
I'm back again. Hello. So I told y'all the hat that I'm wearing for this meeting, but I am also a member of the Essex County Environmental Commission. Now, yeah, I know Sean, right? Sean, you everywhere, right? But I was talking with Christian and Leah and the ICC folks about how, and I don't know how much power we have, but to talk about maybe an ordinance at the county level with the commission. Could we do something like that? Is that permissible? Is that because I really I don't know how
don't
much
know.
power the commission has.
I don't know. I've actually never heard of a county environmental commission, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's county, right? I know. I was invited. I
so,
was like, okay.
I mean, I would consult with the board of county commissioners or the county executive's office and ask those questions. I don't know off the top of my head. It's a really good question.
Yeah, because we worked with Commissioner Siebold, and I'm not sure of the power, but as my brain is cycling about how we can do this, I know certain counties you can't open the mall on Sunday. So if you can't open a mall on Sunday, I would have met, right?
Yeah.
American County, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, but not American Dream, right? That's the fight now. But that's the thing. If the county can say you can't open a mall on a Sunday, can't the county say you have to have this particular type of regulation for pollution? I don't even think a mall pollutes, quote unquote, as harm to
Everything pollutes.
I mean, okay, I take that back. I'm sorry. The mall pollutes, yes, but the harm of smelting metal should be able to be regulated a lot better. You know what I mean? So do you think that dealing with the county commission, environmental county commission, to suggest to all the municipalities in Essex County in particular, because we can branch out later, do you think that that might be a good avenue to tap into to kind of get some regulations on this, since it's not in place yet? And I'm grateful that Moen is, working on this. Actually, Sean Moen, no relation, sent me, Sean, he sent me the regulation while we were here in this meeting. And not the regulation, I'm sorry, the proposed bill. I'm so sorry. And I'm thinking to head it off at the pass. He also is like, get everybody's email. Make sure y'all give me your email addresses too. He's part of Tri-County Sustainability, and I'm part of the EJ committee too. I know I do a lot of things, but it works. So to push this state bill, but to also try it at the county level.
I don't know. I don't have an answer to your question because I don't know that the nature of county laws and what they can or can't do.
Right.
But I do know one thing.
Yes.
Which is that organizing and advocacy matters.
Yes.
And it has impact.
Yes.
And it works.
Yes.
And you should be heard.
Yes.
At every level of government all the time.
Yes.
So go to the county and talk to them too, just like you are tonight with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised or questions in the chat. Do we have anyone else in the room or anyone else online that wants to contribute to the discussion? Okay, well, seeing no one else, I'm going to take this moment to wrap us up and just say a reflection I want to share from tonight is, the reason why we came is because we wanted to be transparent about our current options and our limitations, because we hear the frustrations. And if I'm honest, internally, we have these conversations internally where it's like, oh, well, I understand why they're frustrated about this or why they have this question, but it really doesn't work like that, or we really don't have the opportunity to do this because of that. And so it's so important that you all can hear and be privy to the information that we have, like these internal conversations that we have about those limitations. You are owed that, and you're owed an explanation that makes sense, So the purpose of tonight is to equip you with this information. And my reflection from tonight is I'm just so proud of all of you all. I thank you for coming. the in real time idea creation and brainstorming and ideas and can we do this and can we do that? I can see your wheels spinning after this conversation that we've had tonight. And so that at least demonstrates to me that, you know, this process of engaging, this exercise that we're doing of building relationship, building connectivity into communities and transferring the information that we have onto you so that you all can run with it. It works, you know? And so that makes me feel really good. And I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to do this engagement with you all, because it really matters that we have people within the public that we can connect with and bounce ideas off with. We've heard so many ideas tonight that we are going to do some follow-up and do some phone calls and do some research and look into some things as well. So in the same way that we are equipping you all with information, you are equipping us with information that we will take back and that we will use. And that is so invaluable. So I must say thank you. And I must also say that this not need be the only point of interaction that we have. So we're here tonight to talk about scrap, but if there's any other topic that is on your mind, please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out to the Office of Environmental Justice. We are happy to connect with you and to be a bridge into the Department of Environmental Protection for any other issues, even if it is not about scrap. So thank you. And I'll pass it over to the Commissioner to see if you have any closing words.
I mean, I don't know that I could say it better than Candace Perry. So thank you for leading us on the tour across the state that brought us also, you know, back here, right? This is the exact same place we did our one of our navigating seminars on grant making and permitting. And it's really important because what we learn, as Candace says, when we are engaging with the people that we serve, it helps to inform the work. And it's true, right? It's not just something we say because it sounds good for the government to say they're listening, right? We're listening, right? And sometimes what government can do is when government doesn't have what it thinks is a good answer for you or doesn't have the answer it thinks you want to hear, government might not give no answer at all. I think that's unacceptable, and that you're owed an answer and an explanation always, right? And in part because if it's not what you want to hear, there's a reason for that, right? And the reason is some limitation that exists in our democratic governance structure, right? And that is information you might not otherwise have that can be empowering. So as maybe disappointing as this circumstance we find ourselves in with this continuing these continuing fires and, you know, certainly not wanting any of our communities to be subject to that, I hope that there is some power too in knowing why. And that we can indeed all solve these problems together, right? If we keep working them. So thank you. And thank you to my colleagues here for contributing your time and your talents to this discussion and so many others. So until the next time, thanks.
Thank you.